I thought moving to a quiet subdivision outside Scottsdale, Arizona, would be my ticket to peace and quiet. But I never expected my propane heater would become a battlefield with the HOA president. My name is Isaac Daniels, and I had just purchased a modest 3-bedroom ranch house on Saguaro Ridge Drive in January 2025. The property came with a detached storage shed about 20 feet from the main house, perfect for my woodworking tools and outdoor equipment. Arizona winters can get surprisingly cold at night, dropping into the 30s, and that shed had no insulation whatsoever. Since I spent hours out there working on custom furniture pieces that I sold online, I needed a reliable heat source. I bought a commercial-grade propane heater, the kind contractors use at job sites. It was completely safe, had multiple automatic shut-off features, and I made sure to follow every single safety guideline. I even had a carbon monoxide detector installed and kept a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. The propane tank sat outside in a proper storage cage, exactly as recommended by the manufacturer and local fire codes. Everything was fine for about 3 weeks. I would head out to the shed after work, fire up the heater, and spend my evenings sanding, cutting, and assembling the dining tables and bookshelves that had become my side business. The warmth was perfect, and I was making good progress on a large commission for a client in Phoenix. Then came the knock on my door on a Tuesday evening in late February. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s standing on my porch, wearing designer athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses, even though the sun had already set. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that aggressive ponytail that somehow managed to look both expensive and hostile. She held a leather-bound folder against her chest like a shield. "Good evening," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Patricia Moreland, president of the Saguaro Ridge HOA. I don't believe we've formally met." "Isaac Daniels," I replied, shaking her outstretched hand. "Nice to meet you. Is there something I can help you with?" Patricia's smile tightened. "Well, actually, yes. I've been made aware that you're using some kind of heating device in your storage shed. I need to inform you that this is a violation of our community guidelines." I felt my stomach drop. "I'm sorry, what?" "I reviewed the HOA rules before I bought the house. There's nothing about heaters in storage buildings." She flipped open her folder with practiced efficiency. Section 7, subsection D clearly states that no flammable materials or fire hazards may be stored in auxiliary structures. Your propane tank constitutes a fire hazard. "The tank is outside the shed in a proper storage container," I explained, trying to keep my tone friendly. "And propane heaters are standard equipment. They're designed for this exact purpose. I made sure everything complies with fire safety codes." Patricia's jaw tightened. "The HOA board has determined that this represents an unacceptable risk to the community. I'm going to need you to remove the propane tank and heater immediately." "Can I at least see the specific rule you're referring to?" I asked. Because I really did go through the documents carefully, and I don't remember anything that would prohibit this. She angled the folder toward me, her finger jabbing at a paragraph of dense text. I leaned in to read it. The section she pointed to was about storing gasoline, paint thinners, and other volatile chemicals. It said nothing about properly installed heating equipment. "This is about storage of hazardous materials," I said, "not heating devices. My propane setup is no different from a backyard barbecue grill. Plenty of people in this neighborhood have those. Barbecue grills are specifically permitted under Section 12, Patricia shot back. Your heating system is not. The board will be discussing this at our next meeting, but in the meantime, I strongly suggest you comply with this directive." "When's the meeting?" I asked. I'd like to attend and present my case. Patricia's expression soured. HOA board meetings are closed to general membership unless you've submitted a formal request 14 days in advance. But I'll make sure your concerns are noted. She turned on her heel and walked back to her silver Mercedes SUV parked in my driveway. I watched her drive away, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. This was exactly the kind of petty tyranny I had heard about with HOAs, but I had convinced myself that it wouldn't happen to me. The next morning, I called the Scottsdale Fire Department non-emergency line. I explained my situation to the dispatcher, who connected me with a fire inspector named Rodriguez. "So you've got a commercial propane heater in your shed with the tank stored outside in a proper container?" Rodriguez asked. "Exactly. Everything's by the book." "But my HOA is claiming it's a fire hazard." Rodriguez chuckled. "Look, if you're following manufacturer guidelines and basic safety protocols, you're fine by our standards. HOAs can make their own rules, but they can't override fire safety codes. If your setup meets code, which it sounds like it does, they're going to have a hard time forcing you to remove it. Could you possibly come out and inspect it? I'd love to have documentation that it's safe." "Sure thing. How's Friday afternoon work for you?" We set up the appointment, and I felt slightly better. At least I would have official backing from the fire department. But Patricia wasn't done with me. 2 days later, I came home from my job at an architectural firm to find a citation notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, formally documenting my violation and informing me that I would be fined $50 per day until the issue was resolved. The letter was signed with Patricia's aggressive scrawl. I immediately drafted an email to the HOA board, carefully explaining my position and noting that I had scheduled a fire inspection to confirm the safety of my setup. I attached photos of the heater, the propane storage cage, and the safety equipment in the shed. I kept my tone professional and factual, hoping that cooler heads would prevail. The response came back within an hour, CC'd to all board members. Patricia had written, "Mr. Daniels, your refusal to comply with HOA regulations is noted. The fine schedule will proceed as stated. This is not negotiable. Any further arguments should be submitted in writing according to the dispute resolution process outlined in your HOA bylaws." Friday arrived, and Inspector Rodriguez pulled up in his official vehicle right on time. He was a stocky guy in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. I led him out to the shed and showed him the entire setup. He spent about 20 minutes examining everything, checking the connections, looking at the ventilation, and reviewing the specifications on the heater itself. Finally, he nodded and pulled out a tablet to make notes. "This is all perfectly fine," he said. "Actually, you've done a better job than most people I see. The ventilation is good, you've got your CO detector, fire extinguisher is properly mounted and current on its inspection. The propane storage meets requirements. I don't see any issues here. Can you give me something in writing?" I asked. "Absolutely." He tapped on his tablet for a few more minutes, then turned it toward me. "I'm emailing you the inspection report right now. If your HOA gives you grief, tell them to call our office. We'll back you up." I thanked him profusely and felt a surge of vindication. But that feeling didn't last long. The following Monday, I checked my mailbox and found a letter from a law firm in Phoenix. My heart sank as I opened it. The letter, written on behalf of the Saguaro Ridge HOA, informed me that I was in breach of my covenant agreements and that legal action would be pursued if I did not immediately comply with the board's directive. The accumulated fines now totaled $400. I forwarded Inspector Rodriguez's report to the law firm and to Patricia, along with a detailed explanation of why the HOA's interpretation of their own rules was incorrect. I cited the specific fire codes that my setup met and pointed out that there was no legitimate safety concern. The response was ice cold. Patricia wrote back saying that the HOA's authority to regulate property use was independent of fire codes, and that my aggressive and confrontational attitude was making the situation worse. The fines would continue to accumulate. I realized I needed help, so I hired a real estate attorney named Marcus Brennan who specialized in HOA disputes. Marcus was a sharp guy in his 30s who had dealt with cases like mine before. "Here's the thing," Marcus explained during our first meeting at his office in downtown Scottsdale. "HOAs have broad authority, but they can't be arbitrary or unreasonable. The fact that you have fire department approval is huge. We can challenge this." "What are my options?" I asked. "First, we send them a formal letter explaining that you're in full compliance with safety regulations and that their interpretation of the rules is overly broad and unreasonable. We demand they rescind the fines and stop harassing you. If they don't back down, we can file for an injunction and take them to court." "How much is this going to cost me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'll be straight with you. HOA litigation can get expensive, but in cases like this, if we win, the HOA often has to pay your legal fees. And honestly, I think you've got a strong case." We drafted the letter together, and Marcus sent it via certified mail. I felt like I was finally taking control of the situation, but I underestimated just how stubborn Patricia Moreland could be. Instead of backing down, she escalated. I came home from work one evening in early March to find her standing in my driveway with two other people, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt and khakis, and a younger woman with a clipboard. "Isaac Daniels," Patricia called out as I parked my truck. "That's me," I said cautiously, climbing out of the vehicle. "This is Richard Chen, our HOA board treasurer, and Jennifer Mills, our compliance officer. We're here to conduct an inspection of your property." "An inspection? I wasn't notified about any inspection." Patricia's smile was triumphant. "According to Section 19 of the HOA bylaws, the board has the right to inspect any property with 24 hours notice. I sent you an email yesterday afternoon." I pulled out my phone and checked. Sure enough, buried in my spam folder was an email from Patricia, time-stamped at 4:47 p.m. the previous day. She had clearly timed it to make it as inconvenient as possible. "Fine," I said. "What exactly are you inspecting?" "The fire hazard you've created in your storage shed," Richard said. He had a nasally voice that immediately grated on my nerves. I led them to the shed, unlocked it, and stood back as they filed in. Jennifer immediately started taking photos with her phone while Patricia and Richard poked around, opening cabinets and examining my tools. "This is ridiculous," I said. "The fire department already inspected this and found everything to be in perfect compliance." "The fire department doesn't enforce HOA rules," Patricia said without looking at me. "We do." They spent about 15 minutes in the shed, whispering to each other and taking more photos. Finally, Patricia turned to me with a look of satisfaction. "Mr. Daniels, in addition to the propane heater violation, we've identified several other issues. Your storage of wood materials represents a fire load concern. The electrical extension cord you're using appears to be undersized for the equipment you're running, and there's insufficient clearance between your heater and combustible materials." Every single thing she listed was either false or a gross misrepresentation. The wood was properly stored, the extension cord was industrial grade and rated for double the load I was using, and the heater had 6 feet of clearance in every direction. "This is absurd," I said, my frustration finally boiling over. "You're making things up now. There's nothing wrong with my shed." "We'll be documenting all of this in our report," Richard said. "You'll be receiving additional citations." They left, and I immediately called Marcus Brennan. He listened to my account and let out a long sigh. "They're building a paper trail," he said. "They want to paint you as a problem resident so they can justify stronger action. Don't worry, we'll fight this. But Isaac, I need you to document everything. Every interaction, every email, every citation. Take photos and videos of your shed and your safety equipment. We're going to need all of it." Over the next 2 weeks, the situation spiraled further out of control. I received 3 more citations for various invented violations. The HOA claimed my truck was parked incorrectly in my driveway, even though it was in the exact same spot I had been using for 2 months. They said my mailbox needed repainting, despite the fact that it was in perfect condition. They even cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though I had brought them in from the curb within an hour of pickup. The fines accumulated quickly. By mid-March, the HOA claimed I owed nearly $2,000. Marcus filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which had some oversight over HOA conduct, and we prepared to file a lawsuit. Then, Patricia made her boldest move yet. I was working in my shed on a Saturday afternoon, the propane heater humming quietly as I assembled a custom bookshelf. I heard footsteps outside and looked up to see Patricia standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. They wore matching navy blue polo shirts with Secure Solutions Locksmith embroidered on the chest. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my sanding block. "Mr. Daniels, the HOA board has voted to take possession of this storage shed until such time as you comply with all safety directives and pay your outstanding fines," Patricia announced. "These gentlemen are here to change the locks." My blood ran cold. "You can't do that. This is my property." "Actually, according to the covenant documents you signed when you purchased this home, the HOA has the authority to take remedial action when a homeowner creates a dangerous condition and refuses to correct it. This shed contains multiple fire hazards, and you've been uncooperative at every turn." "I've been uncooperative. You've been harassing me for weeks over a completely legal and safe heating system." "Step aside, Mr. Daniels," one of the locksmiths said uncomfortably. "We're just here to do a job. Do not change those locks," I said firmly. "You do not have my permission, and this is illegal." Patricia pulled out her phone. "If you don't step aside and allow us to perform our duties, I'm calling the police to report that you're interfering with HOA business and threatening us." "Threatening you? I haven't threatened anyone." "Your aggressive behavior speaks for itself," Patricia said coldly. "Last chance. Move or I'm calling 911. I was trapped. If I physically prevented them from accessing the shed, Patricia would twist it into some kind of assault or threatening behavior. If I let them do it, I would be locked out of my own property and unable to access thousands of dollars worth of tools and materials. I pulled out my own phone and started recording video. I'm documenting that I have explicitly refused permission for this action, and that I'm being coerced under threat of false police reports. Patricia's face twisted with anger, but she didn't back down. She stepped aside and gestured to the locksmiths. "Go ahead, gentlemen." They looked uncomfortable, but began removing the old lock from the shed door. I kept recording, capturing their faces and the entire process. Within 10 minutes, they had installed a new heavy-duty padlock and handed the keys to Patricia. "Your belongings will be secured until the board determines you've met the requirements for reinstatement," Patricia said. You'll be receiving formal documentation of this action within 48 hours. You're going to regret this, I said quietly. This is theft. You've just stolen my property and illegally denied me access to my belongings. See that? Patricia said to the locksmiths. He's threatening me again, you heard it. I didn't threaten you, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I stated a fact. You've committed an illegal act and there will be consequences. Patricia turned and walked away, the locksmiths following behind her. I stood in my backyard, staring at the new padlock on my shed door, feeling helpless and furious. I immediately called Marcus Brennan, even though it was a Saturday. He picked up on the third ring. Marcus, they just locked me out of my storage shed, changed the locks and took the keys. They're claiming it's remedial action under the HOA authority. There was a long pause. They actually did that. That's bold. That's also probably illegal seizure of property. Isaac, I want you to call the police right now and report this as theft. Don't mention the HOA stuff at first, just report that someone changed your locks and took your property. You think the police will actually do something? Maybe, maybe not. But we need the police report on record. It'll help our case when we go to court. And Isaac, we're definitely going to court now. They've crossed a major line. I hung up and dialed the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency number. I explained that I needed an officer to come out to document that someone had changed the locks on my storage shed without permission. The dispatcher said they would send someone out. About 40 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up to my house. Officer Sarah Keating stepped out, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. I walked out to meet her. You reported an issue with your storage shed, she asked, pulling out a notepad. Yes, officer. Someone changed the locks without my permission and took the keys. I'm effectively locked out of my own property. You know who did it? My HOA president. She brought a locksmith company and had them change the lock. I told them they didn't have permission, but she threatened to call the police on me if I didn't let them do it. Officer Keating's expression shifted slightly. Ah, HOA dispute. Okay, let me see the shed. I led her around to the backyard. She examined the new lock and took some photos. Then she turned to me with a sympathetic but resigned look. Here's the situation, Mr. Daniels. HOA disputes are generally civil matters, not criminal. If your HOA is claiming they have authority to do this under your covenant documents, that's something you need to resolve through the courts. But this is my property. They can't just take it, can they? It's complicated. If the HOA agreement you signed gives them certain remedial powers, they might argue they have the right to do this. Now, personally, I think it's pretty aggressive and probably wrong, but it's not something I can arrest someone for. This is civil. So there's nothing you can do. I'll write up a report documenting what happened. You'll get a case number. That'll help if you take this to court. But in terms of criminal charges, I don't see anything here that rises to that level. I'm sorry. She spent a few more minutes taking my statement and writing up her report. She gave me the case number and a card with her name and badge number. Good luck with this, she said. For what it's worth, I think your HOA is out of line. After she left, I felt even more defeated. The police couldn't help me. The HOA had my property, and there was no quick way to get it back. I went inside and sent Marcus all the video footage I had taken, along with the police report number. His response came back quickly. This is actually good for us. They've overreached badly. I'm filing an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. We'll get your property back and probably get those fines dismissed. Hang in there. The weekend dragged by agonizingly. I kept walking out to my backyard and staring at the padlocked shed, feeling violated and angry. All I wanted was to use a damn heater in my own building, and somehow it had turned into this nightmare. Sunday evening, my next-door neighbor Tom Rodriguez knocked on my door. Tom was a retired electrician in his 60s, a friendly guy who had helped me fix a circuit breaker issue a few weeks after I moved in. "Hey, Isaac, I heard what happened with Patricia and your shed," he said. "That's some serious garbage. I wanted you to know that a bunch of us in the neighborhood think she's way out of line." "Thanks, Tom. That actually means a lot. Patricia's been a problem for years," he continued. "She runs the HOA like her personal fiefdom. A couple of years ago, she tried to fine the Hendersons because their son's car was too old and decrepit. It was a restored 1987 Mustang that the kid had put thousands of dollars into. She just didn't like the look of it. What happened? They fought it, and eventually she backed down, but it cost them legal fees. That's her pattern. She pushes and pushes until people either give up or spend a fortune fighting her. The problem is, most people on the board are either scared of her or they're her friends. Nobody stands up to her." "Well, I'm standing up to her," I said. "My attorney's filing for an injunction tomorrow." Tom grinned. "Good. It's about time someone took her on properly. If you need anything, character witness or whatever, let me know. A lot of us would be happy to help." Monday morning, Marcus filed our emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and injunction. He also filed a lawsuit against the HOA, Patricia personally, and the 3 board members who had voted to approve the shed seizure. The lawsuit alleged illegal seizure of property, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning at the Maricopa County Superior Court. Marcus warned me that getting an emergency injunction wasn't easy, but he felt confident given the circumstances. Tuesday afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Isaac Daniels?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Republic. I've been covering HOA disputes for a few years now, and I heard about your situation with the Saguaro Ridge HOA. Would you be willing to talk to me?" My first instinct was to say no, but then I reconsidered. Maybe public pressure could help. "Sure, what do you want to know?" Catherine asked me detailed questions about the entire saga, from the initial confrontation over the propane heater to the shed seizure. I sent her copies of the fire department inspection report, the HOA citations, and photos of my setup. She sounded genuinely interested and sympathetic. "This is pretty egregious, even by HOA standards," she said. "I'd like to run a story on this. Would you be comfortable with that?" "Absolutely. At this point, I want people to know what Patricia Moreland is doing. I'll need to reach out to the HOA for comment. They'll probably deny everything or spin it their way, but I'll make sure your side is presented fairly." The article ran online Tuesday evening and appeared in the print edition Wednesday morning. The headline read, "Scottsdale HOA seizes homeowner's shed over propane heater dispute." It was fair and factual, laying out the timeline and including my documentation. The HOA's response was predictable. Patricia had given a statement saying that they were simply enforcing safety rules, and that I had been belligerent and uncooperative. But the article also included Inspector Rodriguez's assessment that my setup was completely safe. The comments section filled up quickly, with hundreds of people expressing outrage at the HOA's behavior. Several other Saguaro Ridge residents posted about their own negative experiences with Patricia. The story started getting picked up by local TV news stations. Wednesday morning, I put on my best suit and met Marcus at the courthouse. We went through security and made our way to the assigned courtroom. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Gerald Hartman. Judge Michelle Torres presided over the hearing. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation for being fair but tough. After we were all seated, she reviewed the paperwork quickly. "This is a hearing on plaintiff's motion for temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction," Judge Torres said. "Mr. Brennan, you're representing Mr. Daniels." "Yes, Your Honor. Lay out your case." Marcus stood and presented our argument clearly and forcefully. He explained the propane heater dispute, showed the fire department inspection report, detailed the escalating harassment from the HOA, and then described the shed seizure. He argued that the HOA had violated my property rights and acted outside the scope of their authority. "Your Honor, the HOA's actions constitute an illegal taking of my client's property," Marcus concluded. "Mr. Daniels has thousands of dollars worth of tools and materials in that shed, and he's being denied access to them based on pretextual safety concerns that have been thoroughly debunked by actual fire safety professionals. We're asking the court to order the immediate return of the shed keys and access to the property." Judge Torres turned to Gerald Hartman. "Mr. Hartman, response." Hartman stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the Saguaro Ridge HOA has a duty to protect the safety and welfare of all residents in the community. Mr. Daniels created a dangerous condition by installing a propane heating system in a wooden storage structure. Despite repeated attempts to work with him, he has refused to comply with reasonable safety directives. The HOA exercised its authority under the covenant documents to take remedial action. This is entirely within the scope of the HOA's powers. You have the covenant documents with you?" Judge Torres asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Hartman pulled out a thick binder and approached the bench. Marcus did the same with our copy. Judge Torres spent several minutes reading through the relevant sections, occasionally flipping back and forth between pages. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Hartman, show me where in these covenants the HOA is granted the authority to seize a homeowner's property and change locks without a court order." Hartman hesitated. "Your Honor, Section 43 grants the HOA the power to take remedial action when a homeowner creates a nuisance or dangerous condition. Define remedial action as used in this document," Judge Torres said. "It means taking necessary steps to abate the nuisance or danger." "Does it specifically authorize seizure of property?" "It authorizes necessary steps, Your Honor. The language is necessarily broad to cover various situations." Judge Torres did not look impressed. "Mr. Brennan, does the fire department consider Mr. Daniels' propane heater setup to be dangerous?" "No, Your Honor. In fact, they inspected it and found it to be in full compliance with all safety codes. We've provided their report to the court." The judge looked back at Hartman. "So the premise of the HOA's action, that this is a dangerous condition, appears to be contradicted by the actual fire safety experts. Is that correct, Your Honor? The HOA has its own standards which may be more stringent than municipal codes." "More stringent is one thing, Mr. Hartman. Arbitrary is another. The court is troubled by the fact that your client has seized this man's property based on safety concerns that appear to have no legitimate foundation. This looks like harassment." Hartman tried to respond, but Judge Torres held up her hand. "I've heard enough. Here's my ruling. The plaintiff's motion for temporary restraining order is granted. The Saguaro Ridge HOA is ordered to immediately return the keys to Mr. Daniels and restore his full access to the storage shed. Furthermore, the HOA is enjoined from imposing any fines or sanctions related to the propane heater unless and until they can provide legitimate evidence that it violates a specific, reasonable provision of the covenant documents. We'll have a full hearing on the preliminary injunction in 30 days. Until then, This order stands." She banged her gavel. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Patricia's face had gone completely red. As we stood to leave, she leaned over to Hartman and hissed something I couldn't quite hear. We all filed out of the courtroom, and in the hallway, Hartman approached Marcus. "We'll have the keys available for pickup at the HOA office this afternoon," he said stiffly. "We'll be there at 2 p.m., Marcus replied. "And Mr. Hartman, you should strongly consider advising your client to drop the fines and stop this harassment. Because if we go to a full trial, it's not going to end well for them." That afternoon, Marcus and I drove to the HOA office, a small suite in a professional building near the subdivision entrance. Patricia was there, sitting behind the reception desk with her arms crossed. She didn't say a word as she slid the keys across the desk toward me. "Thank you," I said, scooping them up. I couldn't resist adding, "This didn't have to go this way, you know. All I wanted was to use a safe, legal heater in my own shed." "This isn't over," Patricia said quietly. "The board is considering other options." "Is that a threat?" Marcus asked sharply. "It's a statement of fact. Mr. Daniels has demonstrated that he's not a good fit for this community." We left before I said something I would regret. Back at my house, I opened the shed and checked that everything was still there. To my relief, nothing appeared to be missing or damaged. I could finally get back to work. But Patricia wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, the harassment continued in more subtle ways. I would receive emails from the HOA about minor, technical violations. Things like my house number being slightly faded and needing to be repainted, or my landscaping rocks being the wrong shade of brown. Each email carried the implicit threat of fines if I didn't comply immediately. I documented everything and forwarded it all to Marcus. He sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA warning them that continued harassment would result in additional legal action and a claim for damages. The situation came to a head in late April. I was at work when my phone rang. It was Tom Rodriguez, my neighbor. "Isaac, you need to get home right now," he said urgently. "Patricia is at your house with the police." My heart started pounding. "What? Why?" "I don't know all the details, but there are 2 cop cars in your driveway. I saw them go into your backyard." I told my supervisor I had an emergency and raced home. When I pulled onto my street, I saw exactly what Tom had described: 2 Scottsdale PD patrol cars in my driveway, lights off but clearly official. Patricia's Mercedes was parked on the street. I jumped out of my truck and hurried into my backyard. Patricia was there with 2 police officers, Officer Keating from the previous incident and a male officer whose name tag read Martinez. They were standing near my shed, which was open. Patricia was gesturing animatedly. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Officer Keating turned to me. "Mr. Daniels, we received a report of a possible illegal substance being manufactured or stored on your property. We're conducting a welfare check." "Illegal substance? That's insane. Who reported this?" Patricia spoke up. "I've observed suspicious activity in your shed at odd hours. Strong chemical smells. You spending long periods of time out here with the door closed. I have a duty to report concerns about illegal activity." The rage that flooded through me was white hot. "You called the police and told them I'm making drugs. I'm a woodworker. The smell is wood stain and varnish. This is harassment." Officer Martinez held up a hand. "Sir, calm down. We're just checking things out. Can you explain what you're doing in this shed?" I forced myself to take a deep breath. "I build custom furniture. That's wood stain over there, that's polyurethane, that's mineral spirits for cleaning brushes. Everything is legal and properly stored. This woman has been harassing me for months over a propane heater, and now she's making false police reports. Officer Keating walked over to the shelf where I kept my finishing supplies. She examined the labels and looked back at Martinez. It's all standard woodworking supplies. Nothing concerning here. Patricia looked frustrated. I know what I smelled. There were chemical odors that were much stronger than wood products. Because I was applying stain to a large table last week, I said through gritted teeth. Oil-based stain has a strong smell. It's not illegal. Officer Martinez turned to Patricia. Madam, did you have any evidence of drug activity other than smells? The suspicious hours he keeps, the way he always locks the shed, the defensive attitude when I've tried to inspect. I lock my shed because it contains expensive tools, I said. And I'm defensive because she's been harassing me nonstop since I moved in. Officer Keating stepped in. Mr. Daniels, is it okay if we look around the shed just to confirm there's nothing concerning? Go ahead, I said. Look anywhere you want. The two officers spent about 10 minutes going through my shed, opening cabinets and checking the contents. They found nothing but woodworking tools, lumber, and finishing supplies. Finally, Officer Martinez turned to Patricia. Madam, there's nothing here. This is clearly a woodworking shop. I don't see any evidence of illegal activity. Patricia's jaw tightened. I made a report in good faith based on legitimate concerns. That may be, Officer Keating said, but for future reference, wood stain and varnish do have strong chemical smells, and they're completely legal. If you're not sure about something, you might want to verify before calling us out. I could tell Officer Keating was trying to be diplomatic, but her tone suggested she thought this was a waste of time. The officers left, and Patricia started to follow them. Wait, I said. Patricia, we need to talk. She turned, her expression cold. I have nothing to say to you. You just filed a false police report. Do you understand how serious that is? It wasn't false. I had legitimate concerns. No, you didn't. You know exactly what I do in this shed. You've been looking for any excuse to cause me problems, and now you've crossed into criminal territory. I could press charges. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Try it. I'll tell them about your aggressive behavior, your refusal to cooperate with reasonable HOA rules, your threatening statements. Let's see who the police believe. She walked away before I could respond. I stood in my backyard, shaking with anger and adrenaline. This had gone way too far. I called Marcus immediately and told him what happened. His response was blunt. She's digging herself a hole. False police reports can be prosecuted. We're going to document this and add it to our lawsuit. Isaac, I think we're also at the point where we should consider filing a restraining order against her personally. Can we do that? We can try. If we can establish a pattern of harassment that rises to the level of stalking or threatening behavior, yes. This false police report helps our case significantly. That evening, I sat down and wrote out a detailed timeline of every interaction I had had with Patricia since she first knocked on my door. Every citation, every threat, every confrontation. It was 8 pages long by the time I finished. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize with a Phoenix area code. I answered carefully. Mr. Daniels, this is Detective Brian Foster with the Scottsdale Police Department. I'd like to talk to you about the incident yesterday at your residence. My stomach dropped. Okay, what about it? I'm following up on the report. Can you come down to the station? I have some questions. Am I in trouble? No, sir, nothing like that. I just need to get your statement on record. We arranged to meet that afternoon. I called Marcus and told him about it. He offered to come with me, and I gratefully accepted. At the police station, Detective Foster turned out to be a serious-looking man in his 40s with graying hair. He led us into an interview room and pulled out a notepad. Mr. Daniels, I've reviewed the officer's reports from yesterday, and I want to get your side of the story. Can you tell me about your relationship with Patricia Moreland?" I walked him through the entire saga, starting with the propane heater dispute and ending with the false drug report. Marcus occasionally interjected to provide legal context. Detective Foster took notes and asked clarifying questions. "You have documentation of these incidents?" he asked. "I have everything," I said. "Emails, photos, videos, legal filings, all of it. I'd like to see that." "Can you send it to me?" "Of course. But can I ask why you're investigating this? The officers yesterday seemed to think it was just an HOA dispute." Detective Foster leaned back in his chair. "Because this isn't the first time we've received calls about you from Miss Moreland. She's called in 3 separate reports over the past month. One about suspicious activity, one about possible trespassing, and yesterday's about drug manufacturing. After the third one, I started looking into the pattern. She's called the police on me 3 times. I was stunned. I only knew about yesterday. The other times, officers drove by and didn't see anything concerning, so they didn't make contact with you. But yeah, she's been calling regularly. When someone makes multiple reports about the same person and they all turn out to be baseless, that raises red flags for us. It looks like harassment." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to review all of Mr. Daniels' documentation, and I'm going to have a conversation with Miss Moreland. If I determine that she's been filing false reports, I'll refer the case to the prosecutor's office. Filing a false report is a crime, and making multiple false reports is even more serious." I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Someone in authority was finally taking this seriously. I spent that evening compiling everything into a folder and emailing it to Detective Foster. Every email from Patricia, every citation, every photo and video, the fire department inspection report, court documents from the injunction hearing, everything. 2 days later, Detective Foster called me back. "Mr. Daniels, I've reviewed your materials. This is pretty damning. I've also spoken with Miss Moreland. She maintains that all her reports were made in good faith, but I don't buy it. The pattern is too clear. I'm referring this to the prosecutor." "What does that mean for me? For you?" "Nothing immediately. You're the victim here. But the prosecutor will review the case and determine whether to file charges against Miss Moreland. I've recommended that they do." "Thank you, Detective. Seriously, thank you. No problem. Look, I've dealt with HOA disputes before, and usually they're just petty civil stuff. But this woman has crossed lines. She needs to be held accountable." The next few weeks were tense. I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop, for Patricia to find some new way to come after me. But things were quiet. The HOA stopped sending me harassment emails. No more surprise inspections. No more police calls. Marcus explained that Detective Foster's investigation had probably scared the HOA board. They're realizing this could blow up into a major scandal. Criminal charges against their president. That's bad news for everyone involved. In mid-May, I received a certified letter from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. It informed me that charges of filing a false report had been filed against Patricia Moreland, and that I might be called as a witness. The letter included contact information for the prosecutor handling the case, an assistant county attorney named David Kim. I called David Kim's office and left a message. He called me back the next day. "Mr. Daniels, thanks for getting in touch. I wanted to give you an update on the case against Miss Moreland. We've charged her with 3 counts of filing a false police report. These are misdemeanors, but they're serious ones. If convicted, she could face fines and potentially jail time. Will there be a trial? That depends. We've offered her a plea deal, probation and community service in exchange for a guilty plea. If she doesn't take it, we'll go to trial. Either way, I'll need you to testify about the pattern of harassment. I'm ready. Whatever you need." The criminal case moved forward slowly, as court cases do. In the meantime, Marcus pushed forward with our civil lawsuit against the HOA. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for early June. At that hearing, the HOA's attorney tried to argue that they had acted reasonably and within their authority. But Judge Torres wasn't having it. She made the temporary injunction permanent, ordering the HOA to cease all harassment of me and to rescind all fines related to the propane heater. Furthermore, Judge Torres said, looking directly at Gerald Hartman, the court finds that the HOA acted in bad faith and outside the scope of its legitimate authority. Mr. Daniels is entitled to damages and attorney's fees. We'll have a hearing on the amount in 30 days. It was a complete victory. Marcus was grinning as we left the courtroom. "That was about as good as it gets," he said. "They're going to have to pay your legal fees plus damages. This is going to cost them a lot of money." The HOA board apparently reached the same conclusion. 2 weeks later, Hartman contacted Marcus with a settlement offer. The HOA would pay $50,000 to me, cover all my attorney's fees, formally rescind all citations and fines, and issue a written apology. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue further civil action. Marcus and I discussed it. "You could probably get more if we go to trial," he said. "But trials are unpredictable and this is a solid offer, up to you." I thought about it. The money was substantial and honestly I just wanted this nightmare to be over. "Let's take it," I said. We accepted the settlement in late June. True to the agreement, I received a formal letter from the HOA board, apologizing for the misunderstandings and confirming that all fines were rescinded. Patricia's name was conspicuously absent from the letter. I later learned from Tom Rodriguez that she had been forced to resign as HOA president as part of the settlement. The criminal case wrapped up in July. Patricia took the plea deal rather than risk a trial. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of filing a false report. The other 2 counts were dropped. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 80 hours of community service, and ordered to pay a fine. She was also prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position during her probation. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked diminished and angry, sitting at the defendant's table in a conservative dress. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and gave a brief statement about how she had been trying to protect the community and had made an error in judgment. She didn't apologize to me or even look in my direction. After the hearing, I ran into Detective Foster in the courthouse hallway. He shook my hand. "Justice served," he said. "I'm glad we could help." "Thank you for taking it seriously," I said. "A lot of people told me HOA disputes were just civil matters and the police couldn't do anything. Usually that's true, but when someone crosses the line into criminal behavior, that's different. She was abusing the system to harass you. That's not acceptable." I drove home that day feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The settlement money more than covered my legal fees and compensated me for the stress and lost time. Patricia was gone from the HOA and had a criminal record. Most importantly, I could use my propane heater in peace. Tom Rodriguez and some of the other neighbors threw a small celebration at his house that weekend. About a dozen people showed up, all of them with their own Patricia Moreland horror stories. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had suffered under her reign. "The best part," Tom said, raising his beer, "is that the new HOA president is Mike Sullivan. You met him yet? He's one of us, reasonable guy. First thing he did was call a meeting and propose revising the rules to be more reasonable and clear. The board voted for it unanimously. "That's great news," I said. "Maybe this community will actually be livable now." Life returned to normal over the summer. I worked on my furniture projects in the shed, the propane heater sitting unused in the warm months but ready for next winter. I paid off some debts with the settlement money and put the rest into savings. The HOA left me alone. In August, I saw Patricia once, pulling out of a driveway 3 streets over from mine. She must have seen me too because she accelerated quickly and didn't look in my direction. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience or if she just felt victimized and wronged. Probably the latter. The whole ordeal taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't meticulously recorded every interaction, email, and photo, I never would have been able to prove my case. Second, don't back down from bullies, even when they have institutional power. Patricia counted on people being too intimidated or too exhausted to fight back. Standing up to her was hard and expensive, but it was worth it. And third, there are good people in positions of authority who will help if you can get their attention. Detective Foster and Judge Torres both took my situation seriously and acted justly. I still live in my house on Saguaro Ridge Drive. The shed is still there, lock changed again to my own specifications. My woodworking business is doing well. I have more commission orders than I can keep up with. And when winter comes and the temperature drops, I'll fire up my propane heater without a second thought. The new HOA board under Mike Sullivan has been competent and reasonable. They clarified the rules, established clear procedures for disputes, and generally stayed out of people's business unless there was a genuine issue. It's what an HOA should be, a body that handles common areas and enforces reasonable standards, not a vehicle for petty tyrants to harass their neighbors. I occasionally see other members of the old board around the neighborhood. Richard Chen, the former treasurer, avoids eye contact when we cross paths. Jennifer Mills, the compliance officer, moved away shortly after Patricia resigned. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was embarrassed by the whole situation and wanted a fresh start. The Arizona Republic reporter, Catherine Walsh, did a follow-up story after the settlement and criminal conviction. The headline was HOA President Convicted After Harassment Campaign Against Homeowner. The article detailed the entire saga and ended with a quote from me. I hope this sends a message that HOA board members can't abuse their authority without consequences. The story got a lot of attention and was shared widely on social media. I received emails from people all over the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Many of them asked for advice, and I always told them the same thing. Document everything, get a good lawyer, and don't give up. Marcus Brennan and I stayed in touch. He told me that the case had been great for his practice. He had gotten several new clients who were dealing with HOA disputes and wanted an attorney who had successfully taken on an HOA board. He joked that I should get a finder's fee. The propane heater that started this whole mess still sits in my shed, working perfectly. Sometimes when I'm out there working on a cold evening, I look at it and shake my head at the absurdity of what happened. All of that drama, all of that stress and expense and legal wrangling over a piece of safety equipment that was completely legal and properly installed. But it was never really about the heater, of course. It was about power and control. Patricia Moreland saw herself as the guardian of the community, and anyone who didn't submit to her authority was a threat. She couldn't tolerate someone standing up to her, so she escalated and escalated until she crossed into criminal territory. The sad thing is that it didn't have to go that way. If she had approached me reasonably in the first place, if she had been willing to listen when the fire department confirmed my setup was safe, if she had accepted the judge's ruling and moved on, none of the rest would have happened. Instead, her ego and her need for control destroyed her reputation and left her with a criminal record. I sometimes wonder if she regrets it. Probably not. People like Patricia rarely engage in that kind of self-reflection. She probably still thinks she was in the right and that I was the problem. Tom Rodriguez told me an interesting story a few months after everything settled down. He ran into Patricia's husband at the grocery store. Apparently, the criminal case and the scandal had put a major strain on their marriage. Her husband was humiliated by the publicity and angry that her behavior had cost them money. She had to pay for her own criminal defense attorney, and those fees weren't cheap. He told me she still insists she did nothing wrong, Tom said. She thinks the judge was biased, the police were incompetent, and you somehow manipulated everyone. Zero accountability. That didn't surprise me. I had seen Patricia's personality up close. She was someone who could never admit fault, never acknowledge that she might have been wrong. Everything was always someone else's fault. The whole experience made me much more careful about HOAs. I now understood why people complained about them so much. When they work properly with reasonable people in charge, they can be beneficial. But when someone like Patricia gets control, they can make your life hell. I started attending HOA board meetings regularly after everything settled down, not because I wanted to be on the board, but because I wanted to keep an eye on things. Mike Sullivan was doing a good job, but I had learned that vigilance was important. You couldn't just assume that the people running your HOA had good intentions. Several other homeowners who had been intimidated by Patricia also started attending meetings. We formed an informal watchdog group, making sure that the board stayed accountable and didn't slip back into the old patterns. It was a small time commitment, just a couple of hours a month, but it made a real difference in the community. The shed itself became something of a neighborhood landmark. Tom jokingly suggested I should put up a plaque. Site of the Great Propane Heater War of 2025. I declined, but I appreciated the sentiment. My furniture business continued to thrive. The publicity from the news articles had actually helped. Several people reached out saying they wanted to support someone who had stood up to HOA tyranny. I got commissioned to build a custom dining set for a family in Phoenix, a bookshelf wall unit for a lawyer in Tempe, and a bedroom set for a couple in Flagstaff. The shed that had caused so much trouble became the source of a growing income. I even hired an assistant, a young guy named Jake who was learning woodworking and needed experience. We worked together in the shed several evenings a week, the propane heater keeping us warm through the winter months. Jake knew the whole story, of course. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. But he found it hilarious rather than concerning. So you're telling me that all this drama happened because you wanted to be warm while you worked, he said, laughing. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Welcome to HOA life, I replied. As time passed, the whole ordeal started to feel more like a strange story than something that had actually happened to me. But the lesson stayed with me. I was more assertive about my rights. I was more careful about documentation. And I was much more skeptical of people in positions of minor authority who acted like they were running kingdoms. The $50,000 settlement was put to good use. I paid off my truck, built up my emergency fund, and invested in better equipment for my woodworking business. I also donated $5,000 to a legal aid organization that helped people fight HOA disputes. If my experience could help someone else stand up to a petty tyrant, it would be worth it. Patricia Moreland finished her probation without incident, as far as I knew. I never saw her around the neighborhood after that one glimpse in August. Tom told me she kept to herself and rarely left her house. Her husband filed for divorce about a year after the criminal conviction, citing irreconcilable differences. She moved out of Saguaro Ridge entirely, supposedly to a condo in Phoenix that didn't have an HOA. The irony of that wasn't lost on anyone. The neighborhood improved dramatically under new leadership. The HOA focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing social events. The atmosphere became friendly rather than fearful. People stopped worrying about getting arbitrary citations for minor issues. Mike Sullivan served as president for 2 years before passing the torch to another reasonable neighbor, a retired teacher named Barbara Lynn. She continued the sensible approach, and the HOA became what it should have been all along, a helpful organization rather than a source of stress. I eventually got to know most of my neighbors well. We had block parties and holiday gatherings. People looked out for each other. It was the kind of community I had hoped for when I bought the house, and through it all, my shed remained my sanctuary. I would go out there after work, fire up the heater when it was cold, and lose myself in the work of shaping wood into beautiful, functional pieces. The tools that Patricia had tried to deny me access to became the instruments of a successful business and a fulfilling hobby. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for the experience, though I wouldn't want to go through it again. It taught me that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's hard. It showed me that the legal system, for all its flaws, can work when you have documentation and persistence. And it proved that bullies, no matter how much institutional power they wield, can be held accountable. The propane heater sits in the corner of my shed right now, ready for the next cold spell. It's just a piece of equipment, a simple appliance that provides warmth. But to me, it represents something more. It represents the principle that you have a right to live peacefully in your own home, to use safe and legal equipment, and to not be harassed by petty bureaucrats on power trips. Every time I turn it on, I remember the whole saga. The confrontations, the legal battles, the stress and anger. But I also remember the victory, the moment when Judge Torres ruled in my favor, when Detective Foster took my case seriously, when the settlement check arrived in the mail. I won. Patricia lost, and the community is better for it. That's the end of the story, really. No dramatic final confrontation, no Hollywood ending. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I stood up for myself, fought the good fight, and came out on top. My shed is mine, my tools are mine, and my propane heater keeps me warm while I work. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted.